Welcome to Nebraska Farmcast, a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. I'm Ryan Evans. For livestock producers managing available feed resources on pasture and rangeland during a drought, taking care to avoid overgrazing is essential. Nebraska Extension Beef Systems educator Ryan Benjamin is here with me to discuss how stocking rates and other management practices can be effective, along with the importance of being flexible in planning and applying these strategies. Hey, Ryan, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. And you've got a new article up on our Center for Ag Profitability website at cap.unl.edu. You really encourage producers to look at creating interannual plans that can help to mitigate financial impacts as conditions may change from year to year. So can you just explain more about what you mean and why it's important to be flexible?
Yeah, so for a lot of people, I think, as we get into drought years like this year, they often don't have set decision points. And so it can really drive them to make decisions kind of too late or later than what they could have. So they lose some of the options that they could have taken if they would have made a decision earlier on. And so kind of my premise for this is, we often work off of like averages, and we talk about normal years, but we hardly ever actually have a normal year. And so, especially when you're in a native rangeland setting like we are up here in Cherry County, we do worry about overgrazing. And so making some of these stocking rate decisions earlier on can save us from causing rangeland degradation or rangeland health problems. So a lot of times it's encouraged that producers stock at what they call a moderate level. And usually that's kind of just a little shy of an average year. And generally that prevents you from having the flexibility to take advantage of good years with a lot of extra forage growth, but then it doesn't always protect you from a drought year, and you still end up having to liquidate some of your herd. And so it's not really maybe the best option, though it probably is the easiest. So I guess an example is like in Valentine this year, the average cumulative rainfall to date, so like 9/23/22, the day we're recording this, usually the average cumulative rainfall is about 18 inches. The highest recorded was about 29. The lowest recorded about 8.5 inches of rainfall. And that range is over 20 inches that we've experienced from highest to lowest. And this year we're just over 10 inches at this point. So we see a lot of this, what I like to call interannual changes. So just year to year, there's a lot of differences. And especially for people that are needing to make a land payment, cash flow is very important. And so being able to capture the most profit you can in the good years and then minimize your losses in the bad years is really important.
Great. And because we are talking a lot about stocking rates here, before we go any further, one question I know that we get from time to time from producers is how stocking rates are determined. So can you shed some light on that?
Yeah. So stocking rate's basically just a simple equation. It's often expressed in animal unit months per acre or per pasture. It's the number of animal units times months divided by area. So essentially it's a measure of forage intake for a 1,000-pound cow with a calf under 3 months, and that's equivalent to about 780 pounds of air dry forage. Now, obviously, different size animals eat different amounts. So to get to an animal unit equivalent, you just take the pounds of the animal that you're grazing, divide it by 100, or 1,000, excuse me, and then that gets you an animal unit equivalent, and then you can plug that into that equation. So then that would be, so animal units would be your animal unit equivalent of the average animal you're grazing times the number of animals times the amount of time divided by the area.
Great. And again, if listeners want to read more about what Ryan is explaining here, you can find that in his new article again on our website at cap.unl.edu. And Ryan, when it comes to the animals themselves, what is an example, if you can walk through one maybe, of building the flexibility that you write a lot about in this, building that flexibility into stocking rates?
Yeah. So the easiest way I see to build flexibility into your animals is to include different either stages of production or different animal enterprises. So an example of that would be if you're just a traditional cow-calf producer and you calve, say, in March and sell your calves in November, an option to add some flexibility is to look at retaining your stocker calves instead of selling in November. You could retain those, especially if you're forecasting for a good year or you have excess hay and excess feedstuffs. You could retain those through the winter and maybe hit a different market in the spring or late winter. Or if, like I said, if you're having what looks like a good forecast and the possibility of good grass resources, retaining those clear through the summer. And you may look at, instead of retaining your own, you may purchase stockers in the spring or custom graze. And you wouldn't have to necessarily custom graze stockers. You could take in other people's pairs. There's a lot of options, I think, even including small ruminants like sheep or goats. But by including different options rather than just only being willing to do one, that adds a lot of flexibility that you can increase or reduce the number of animals on your area. And that's the flexibility in the stocking rate.
Great, thank you. And then how about when it comes to the feed itself, how can flexibility be applied to forage and grazing planning?
Yeah, so I think to be flexible, you have to plan ahead. So you need to be looking at, like I've been saying, some forecasts, and then maybe looking at your own precipitation and grazing records, and just try to compare, what you've seen in the past to what they're forecasting, and then try to make a best estimate. And obviously, you're probably not going to be right, but having a plan with some, points where we make decisions is better than just winging it, because it gives us a lot more options and places to make decisions throughout the year than if we just fly by the seat of our pants. So options for increasing flexibility in your forage resource is if you own a lot of pasture, you may stock at a conservative rate, and in good years with good precipitation, good forage resources, you could rent out pasture you don't need. And on the other side of that, if you're, maybe you just own enough pasture for a good year or rent enough pasture for a good year, in poor years, you might try to find some more pasture to rent, or maybe try to graze some CRP acres. There's some opportunities there, I think. As well as like hay and stored feeds, you might have to buy more hay or look at some other options such as corn stalks, to feed calves through drier periods.
Great. And you also discuss in your article a third dimension where it could be useful to be flexible. You talk about building time flexible systems. So what do you mean by this? What could these look like?
Yeah, so time flexible systems are systems in which you can make a decision point at different times to either reduce your stocking rate or increase your stocking rate. So what I would recommend is like having some stock that you can liquidate if things are worse than you expected. So this is where stockers and yearlings are really handy, because you can easily sell them without impacting your breeding herd. And it takes a lot less time to buy them back or sell them. A breeding herd, you have a lot invested into them as far as time. So other options that are time flexible would be grazing leases. You can put clauses into your grazing leases that would allow you to pay rent based on use rather than like a set rate for 5 months, and even if you run out of forage, you still have to pay that amount. Early weaning calves versus late weaning calves, that you can make that decision every year. So in drier years, you might wean your calves earlier, and there's research that shows that saves about 10 pounds of forage per day per animal. So that's a big time factor there. Preg checking cows. If it's dry, we can preg check a little earlier maybe, and cull some open cows or late calving cows. Generally, we see late calving cows have lighter calves headed into the sale ring, so they tend to not bring as much money. So if we can get rid of those, maybe they'll fit into someone else's herd a little better. One other thing I talk about in the article is kind of options for bulls. If you have some neighbors or some other local producers that have similar herds and similar management goals, it might be a possibility to either rent some of your bulls out to those guys or to purchase bulls together, and then you would not have to feed the bulls throughout the entire year. So I guess that's kind of maybe more of a animal flexibility than a time flexibility, but I think it's something to think about, maybe how you could take advantage of that.
Yeah, a lot of great options to think about here. And before I let you go, if we could go back one more time to figuring the stocking rate. You're based in Cherry County, and I'm sure you and your extension colleagues get a lot of questions about stocking rates for different parts of the state. Is that an easy question to answer? And are there resources that are available that can help producers to determine their stocking rates more easily?
So it's not an easy question to answer. There's a lot of factors that play into it. Obviously, the main one is precipitation, but past management also has a lot to do with it. And there's a lot of resources to help people figure that out. Previous managers generally have some pretty good records about what they historically have run on a place. And so if you can talk to them, that's often a good opportunity to gain a lot of insight. Extension agents may have some knowledge. Not all extension agents know a lot about stocking rates and range management, but there's some of us that do. NRCS personnel, they often do know kind of what the average is for the area at least, and that's a good starting point. And then there's some online resources. Web Soil Survey, that's put out through the NRCS. It's a good baseline, largely based on soil type. And it's not, I would say, the most user-friendly, but it is a good place to get a start. And one that's become recently available is Rangeland Analysis Platform. And it uses remotely sensed data. So each year is more tied to the actual production. It's been backed by a whole lot of field verifications and validation monitoring. So it's pretty accurate, and it gets you more into this interannual variability. It captures a lot more of that. And then I guess one other is GrassCast. That's kind of more of a forecasting tool to adjust your stocking rates year to year. It gives 3 options: a below annual rainfall, normal rainfall, and above annual rainfall conditions. And then I usually use that in conjunction with the National Weather Service Climate Prediction Center and use their season-long forecasts to kind of figure out which scenario seems most likely.
Great. And if listeners want to find links, I know that those are included in the article, links to those resources, a number of those that you just mentioned in your article at cap.unl.edu. And Ryan, I want to thank you so much for your time, for a great article, for more great information here in the podcast, and encourage listeners once again to check that out. And again, Ryan Benjamin is a beef systems extension educator based in Cherry County with Nebraska Extensions. Ryan, it's been a pleasure. Thanks again for your time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Nebraska Farmcast is a production of the Center for Agricultural Profitability at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. For the latest research-based information and education resources to manage your farm or ranch operation, visit our website at cap.unl.edu. That's cap.unl.edu.